The Mafia boss installed cameras to watch his kids. What he saw that night left him frozen. They gave me a name before they gave me a choice. Serafina, daughter of the serpent. Raised in Sforza silence, trained in Sforza shadow. My father, Don Emilio il Serpente Sforza, used to say that every fox is born already running. He meant it as a compliment. I spent 26 years figuring out what I was running from. The answer, I now know, was him. It started 4 weeks before the night everything broke open. I was sitting in my father's study, marble floors, curtains so heavy they ate the light, while he poured 2 fingers of Amaro and told me my assignment. His voice had the particular flatness he saved for things he considered already decided. Cassian Valtieri, he said, il fantasma. His wife is 3 years in the ground. His children are soft. His grief has made him careless. He slid a photograph across the desk. A man, tall, dark suit, white collar, standing at the edge of a terrace with his back turned, looking out over the city like it owed him something. Even in the photo, the stillness of him registered differently than other men's stillness. It wasn't peace. It was compression, a coiled thing waiting for the reason to release. You'll go in as the nanny, my father said. The agency placement is already arranged. You have the credentials. You have the face. They'll trust you because you don't look like a weapon. He smiled when he said it. I didn't. I had been a weapon for my father since I was 17. It wasn't something that left marks you could see. It left marks in the way I moved through rooms. Quiet, cataloging exits, watching hands. I could read threat levels the way other women read body language. I could neutralize a grown man in 4 seconds without breaking anything expensive nearby. My father needed that inside the Valtieri penthouse. He needed someone Cassian Valtieri would never see as dangerous. So 2 weeks later, I stood in the lobby of a building on the Upper East Side with a leather portfolio and a forged employment history and a heart that had gone carefully, professionally numb. Tommaso Greco, the consigliere, the one they called the Blade, met me in the lobby. He was built like a warning shot. He looked at me the way men like him always look at women like me, assessing value, calculating threat, landing on negligible. I let him. The penthouse was extraordinary, not ostentatious, precise. Black marble, low light, art on the walls that cost more than most city blocks. I cataloged it the way I cataloged everything. Then the children appeared. Luca first, 8 years old, dark-eyed, jaw already starting to square the way his father's must have squared at that age. He stared at me with a directness that was unnerving in a child. Then he said, "You smell like roses." It was the last thing I expected. Behind him, Bianca, 5 years old, clutching a stuffed rabbit, watching me with the enormous, solemn eyes of a child who had learned too early that adults leave. She didn't say anything. She just reached out and took my hand, like she had decided something and it was over. My chest did something then that I didn't have a name for. I told myself it was inconvenient. I didn't meet him until the second day. I was reading to Bianca in the nursery, the one with the tall windows and the cream-colored curtains, when the door opened without a knock. The air in the room changed. That's the only way I can describe it. The temperature didn't drop, the light didn't shift, but something rearranged itself. He was even bigger in person than the photograph suggested, not just height, presence, the kind that filled architecture. He stood in the doorway in a charcoal shirt with his sleeves rolled to the elbows and looked at his daughter first. The expression that crossed his face when he saw Bianca laughing, it was gone in under a second. But I saw it, devastatingly unguarded. A man who loved his children with a kind of ferocity that had nowhere else to go. Then he looked at me, storm-gray eyes, the color of sky right before it decides what it's going to do. He didn't speak for a long moment, just looked. Then, Miss Volpe. My name in his voice was a different word than I'd ever heard it be. Mr. Valtieri, I said, calm, professional, hiding the fact that my pulse had made a decision entirely without my permission. He nodded once, looked at Bianca again, she had gone back to her book, unconcerned, and left. I sat with my heart doing something architectural for the rest of the afternoon and told myself it meant nothing. I was lying, of course, but I didn't know that yet. If you're already holding your breath, a quick subscribe keeps the darkness coming. The penthouse had 37 cameras. I found them in the first 3 days.
Not because I was looking, because I was trained to look. Doll's eyes, smoke detectors, a crystal orb on the bookshelf that was distinctly not a decorative crystal orb. He'd built a surveillance architecture that most security firms would have charged a fortune for. It covered every public room, every hallway, both nurseries. What it didn't cover, or what I chose to believe it didn't cover, was the East Wing bathroom, the narrow linen closet off the kitchen, and the space between Luca's wardrobe and the wall where I sometimes sat on the floor reading to him when he had the nightmares. I should have been rattled by the cameras. I should have reported to my father that the environment was heavily monitored and adjusted the timeline accordingly. Instead, I found myself understanding them. A man who had watched his wife die on his own driveway, shot by men who wanted him. That man would do exactly this. He would build a web of eyes around everything he had left. He would watch his children sleep through screens at 3 a.m. from whatever blood-stained corner of the city he was occupying. He would see them breathing, and that would be the only thing that let him breathe too. I understood it. That was the first crack. By the end of week 1, I had a routine. Luca woke at 6:30, specific about his breakfast, already reading at a level that could embarrass most adults. He asked me once why I didn't flinch when Tommaso walked into the room. Most people, he informed me very seriously, flinched at Tommaso. I've met a lot of Tommasos, I told him. He thought about this. You mean scary men? I mean men who are paid to look scary, I said. It's a job description, not a personality. Luca considered this for so long that I thought he'd moved on. Then, my father is actually scary, not the job kind. I looked at him. I know. I think you're not scared of him, Luca said. I think he knows. 8 years old, his father's son. I started seeing Cassian in fragments, the way you piece together a person from what they leave in rooms. The half-read book on military strategy left face down on the kitchen counter. The child's drawing taped to the inside of his office door. Bianca's work, clearly. A purple figure with enormous hands labeled in crooked letters, Papa. The fact that he always knew when I'd been in a room, not from the cameras but from something else, some registering of changed air, and that he'd sometimes pause in doorways afterward, like a man standing at the edge of something he couldn't name. I reported to my father once a week, coded messages, security rotation patterns, entry points, the location of the private server room, information that would make the Valtieri compound vulnerable in the ways the serpent needed it to be vulnerable. Each time I sent a report, I sat alone for 10 minutes afterward, feeling something I didn't examine too closely. On the 11th night, the storm came in off the Atlantic. I couldn't sleep. The rain was the kind that felt personal, driving against the windows with a rhythmic insistence that made the penthouse feel both sealed and exposed. I checked on the children at midnight, both deeply asleep. Luca had his stuffed wolf, Bianca her rabbit. I stood in the doorway and watched them for longer than necessary. Then I went to the tall window in the corner of the nursery and parted the curtains. The city below was all smeared light and rain. I stood there and let myself feel, for just a moment, the full weight of what I was doing. Not the tactical reality of it, the human one. These children had lost their mother. They had a father who loved them through glass and distance, because love and grief, for him, had become indistinguishable. And I was here to complete what the serpent had started 3 years ago. I was thinking this when I saw the shadow on the balcony. Not rain movement, not the particular way wet curtains shift against wind. A shape with intention, deliberate, professional. The window latch lifted without sound. I didn't think. Thinking is for before. In the moment, the body moves on what it was trained to do. The man was inside in 3 seconds. Silenced pistol, tactical vest, Sforza ink on his wrist. A serpent coiled around a dagger that I recognized because I had grown up surrounded by it. My father's personal mark. His elite. The best he had. He wasn't here for Cassian. He was here for the children. The rage that moved through me was not professional. It was not calculated. It was the kind of thing that lives below every layer of training and conditioning, in the place that doesn't negotiate. I moved before he could raise the pistol, and what happened in the next 7 seconds I will not narrate in detail except to say, he did not hurt those children. He did not get close. And when it was over, I held the weight of his body in my arms and understood, with perfect clarity, that my father had sent his assassin to kill Cassian's children. Not to pressure him, not to send a message, to destroy him the way you destroy a ghost, by taking the only things that kept him visible. I got the body out of the nursery. I cleaned the floor. I checked on Luca and Bianca, who had slept through everything with the profound unconsciousness of children who feel safe. Then I knelt beside Luca's bed, and I whispered the truth into the quiet. I didn't know I was being watched. Engagement question. The moment Sarah chose those children over her mission, was that the real turning point? Or did it start the first time Cassian looked at her? Tell me what you think in the comments. He was in my room by dawn. I heard him before I saw him. Or rather, I felt him, the way you feel a pressure change before a storm commits. The bedroom door didn't open loudly. It opened the way he did everything, with a precision that left no room for accident. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, still dressed. I hadn't slept. I'd been waiting, in the specific way that people wait when they know something is coming and they've made their peace with it. He stood in the doorway with the hallway light behind him and his face in shadow. He was still in last night's clothes, the sleeve rolled up, the tie missing, the collar open. He looked like a man who had been very still for a very long time and was now choosing, deliberately, to move. "How much of it did you hear?" I asked. Not a smart opening, but I was done with the architecture of pretending. He stepped into the room and closed the door. He didn't answer my question. He crossed to the chair by the window and sat down, not with the sprawl of a man who owns every room he enters, but with the measured placement of a man who is managing something that wants to be unmanageable. "All of it," he said. The words landed in me the way cold water lands. Complete. Irreversible. "Then you know what I am," I said. "I know what you were sent to be," he said. There was a distinction in his voice, precise as a scalpel. "That's not the same thing." I looked at him. He was watching me with those storm-gray eyes, and there was nothing in them that resembled the violence I had expected. there was something worse. Something I didn't have a word for that was adjacent to grief and adjacent to hunger, and was neither.
"I should have called Tommaso," he said. "The moment I watched you handle that man, I should have had you in a chair with a light in your face until you gave me everything." He paused. I didn't.
Why?
The question came out smaller than I intended. He was quiet for a long moment. The rain had gentled to something almost domestic against the glass. "Because you knelt beside my son's bed," he said. "And the words you said to him." He stopped. His jaw moved once. "A woman who says those words and means them doesn't get sent back to the man who sent her here." I felt my throat close, not with fear, with something that didn't have a clean name. "I am Emilio Sforza's daughter," I said. I needed him to understand the full weight of it. Not a hired operative. His blood. He sent his own daughter into your house to finish what he started with Elena. Cassian's voice was very quiet. "I know." The name, his wife's name, hung between us, sacred and savage. "He told you they were sending someone," I said. "I was told a woman named Volpe had been inserted into the placement agency 18 months ago. I needed to know who she was before I decided what to do with her." He looked at me steadily. "So I brought you here." I stared at him. "You knew," I said slowly. "You brought me here knowing I brought you here because I wanted to look at what Emilio Sforza was willing to sacrifice." Something flickered in his expression. "He sent his daughter. That tells me how desperate he is. And a desperate man makes mistakes." I should have felt used, strategically maneuvered. I was a piece in a game that had been running longer than my assignment. But here is what I actually felt, sitting in the gray pre-dawn light with Cassian Valtieri watching me with an expression that was not quite the face of a man discussing operational tactics. I felt seen. Not assessed, not cataloged. Seen. It was terrifying. "What happens now?" I asked. He stood from the chair. In the growing light, he was even more than he was in shadow. The line of his jaw, the particular weight of exhaustion that looked different on him than it looked on other men, the way he moved as if the room was always slightly too small. He stopped at the door and turned back. His eyes found mine. "Now," he said, "you tell me everything, and I decide whether to keep you." He left. I sat in the growing light and felt the most dangerous thing I had felt in 26 years of living carefully. Hope. He kept me. Not innocuously, not with a raised eyebrow and a fresh contract. He kept me the way Il Fantasma kept anything he decided had value. Completely. On his terms, with a security detail so seamless I sometimes couldn't tell where the staff ended and the surveillance began. He also told the children nothing had changed. That detail undid me a little. He could have had me removed quietly. He could have used me as leverage against my father. He could have done any number of things that a man of his position would consider rational. Instead, he walked into the breakfast room on the morning after the worst night of my life and watched Bianca climb into my lap and steal my toast, and said nothing. Just poured his espresso, looked at me over the rim for exactly 1 second, and went back to his newspaper. Tommaso did not receive the same instruction. He found me alone in the library 2 days later and closed the door behind him with the energy of a man who had been patient for as long as patience was professionally required and was now professionally done with it.
"If you're playing him," Tommaso said, "I will personally make sure they never find you." "I know," I said. He frowned. He'd expected more resistance. "You should be afraid." "I am afraid," I said. "Not of you." He studied me for a long moment. Tommaso Greco was not a stupid man. He was, in fact, exactly the kind of brilliant that masqueraded as brutality, which was, I suspected, why Cassian trusted him above everyone else. "Of him?" he asked. "Of myself," I said. Something moved through Tommaso's expression. He picked up his jacket from the chair and left without another word. I didn't know then that I had passed some kind of test. I found out later. Cassian told me, many weeks after, the way he told me most things, flat, factual, watching to see how I absorbed it, that Tommaso's report had been 3 words: "She's already gone." The education happened in layers. He didn't brief me formally. He exposed me in the way that a man who doesn't entirely trust something but can't stop himself from showing it to you anyway exposes it. I attended a business dinner as his companion, a gathering of legitimate interests, shipping logistics, nothing that would look wrong from the outside. He introduced me with a neutrality that told the other men at the table precisely nothing, which told them everything. I felt their recalculations. A woman Cassian Valtieri brought to the table was not staff, was not casual. I wore a black dress and kept my face arranged in the expression I had been taught, attentive but not eager, present but not transparent, and watched him negotiate across the table with a quietness that was more threatening than volume. He never raised his voice. He never needed to. The room bent toward him the way rooms bend toward things that contain enormous pressure. In the car afterward, he didn't speak for several minutes. Then, "You noticed when Caruso touched his left ear." "It was the 3rd time," I said. Every time the Sforza name came up. Cassian turned to look at me. A long look. The city moved outside the windows. "Yes," he said. That was all. But that night, Tommaso got a phone call, and I learned later that Caruso was no longer an issue. The children watched all of this with the particular attentiveness of small people who have learned that adult behavior is worth monitoring. Luca began asking me questions about geography, pointed, specific questions about ports and trade routes that no 8-year-old with ordinary curiosity asks. I answered them honestly, which seemed to satisfy something in him. Bianca asked me, one evening while I was braiding her hair, whether I was going to stay. "I don't know yet," I told her, the honest answer. She considered this with her enormous gravity. I asked Papa. He said yes. My hands went still in her hair. He said yes? He said... She scrunched her face, remembering. He said some foxes know when they've found their den, even if they don't know it yet. I looked at my own hands for a moment. He had said that to his 5-year-old. I didn't know whether to be furious or undone. I chose undone. It was more accurate. Engagement question. Some foxes know when they've found their den. Was that Cassian's first real confession? Or had he already told her something without words long before that? Drop your thoughts below. There was a night, 3 weeks after the night with the cameras, when everything shifted in a way that had nothing to do with danger and everything to do with something quieter and more final. The children were asleep. The penthouse was down to its nighttime register, the low hum of climate control, the distant sound of the city 30 floors below. I was in the kitchen making tea with the lights low, wearing an oversized sweater and the particular kind of tiredness that is really just the weight of sustained alertness finally letting go. He walked in because he was always walking into rooms I occupied without warning, which I had decided was either surveillance or something he didn't have a name for yet either. He stopped when he saw me. The kitchen was narrow. There was not very much of it to have between two people. "Tea," I said, by way of explanation. He looked at the kettle, then at me. Something in his expression was different from his usual careful control, softer around the edges, or maybe just less defended, the way people are at midnight when the professional architecture has been running all day and starts to thin. He got a glass from the cabinet, sat down at the kitchen counter with the glass of water he hadn't poured yet, and just sat, which was unusual. Cassian Valtieri was not a man who sat without purpose. I poured my tea and stayed because leaving felt more deliberate than staying. "Bianca asked me today whether you'd been a ballerina," he said. I almost smiled. "What did you tell her?" "That you moved like someone trained for something more serious than dancing." A pause. "She said that sounded like a compliment and a threat at the same time." "She's 5, I said. "She's already smarter than most adults." "She has her mother's perceptiveness." His voice didn't break, it just waited, the way a stone waits water. I looked at him. He was staring at the counter. "Tell me about Elena," I said. He looked up, and this was the thing about Cassian. This was the thing I had been cataloging in the margins of every interaction for weeks without admitting I was doing it. He never gave the face he was expected to give. The face men like him gave when someone mentioned something soft was usually armor. His was just true. "She laughed too loud in restaurants," he said. "She argued with Tommaso about wine and was almost always right. She used to steal Luca's stuffed wolf and hide it in different places around the apartment so he'd have to look for it and she could watch his face when he found it." He paused. "She thought I was funny. No one else thinks I'm funny." "You're not funny," I said. He looked at me for a moment, and then, for the first time, his mouth moved into something that was not quite a smile, but was closer to a smile than anything I had seen on his face in all the weeks prior. Brief, private, like light through a keyhole. "No," he agreed. "I'm not." We sat in the quiet kitchen and I felt the exact texture of the moment, the particular weight of two people who have been circling something and have ended up, without planning it, standing in the same place at the same time with nothing between them but honesty and the dark. He reached across the counter. Not for me, for the mug I'd set down. He wrapped his hand around it, the heat, I think, more than anything, and then set it back. But his hand was 3 inches from mine when he did it. 3 inches. Neither of us moved for a moment that lasted several ordinary lifetimes. "Serafina," he said. My name had been many things in his mouth by then. A question, an assessment, a warning. This was none of those things. This was just the word. My name, said the way you say a word when you want the word itself, not what it means. I looked up at him. He was very close. The kitchen was narrow. "I know what you are," he said. "I know what you were sent to do. I know who your father is." His voice was low, steady, the kind of steady that takes enormous effort to maintain. "I know all of it. And I'm still sitting in this kitchen at midnight because—" He stopped. "Because?" I said, barely above a whisper. He looked at me for a long time. Then he stood, and for a moment he was so close I could feel the warmth coming off him, smell the cedar and smoke of him, feel the full compressed weight of everything we had both been not saying for weeks. His hand came up. He didn't touch my face. He touched one strand of hair that had fallen forward, barely, just the brush of his fingers moving it back, the most restrained gesture I had ever felt from anyone, and his eyes were on mine when he did it. "Because you chose them," he said, "when it mattered. You chose them." Then he stepped back, picked up his untouched glass of water, and left. I stood in the kitchen for a long time afterward, with my heart making decisions neither of us had formally authorized. I told him the full truth on a Tuesday, not because he demanded it. He had stopped demanding. There is a particular power in a man who stops pressing, who creates the specific silence that makes truth want to fill it. And Cassian had mastered it in a way that I suspected was both instinct and calculation, and didn't bother being embarrassed about. I found him in his office. The good one, not the one he used for meetings. The private room at the back of the penthouse with the high shelves and the photograph of Elena and the children on the desk, and the window that looked northeast, toward nothing in particular except city and sky. I closed the door. He looked up from whatever he was reading and waited.
My mother was a Valtieri, I said. The room rearranged itself. Cassian put down his pen. He did it very carefully. Not your bloodline, I said. A cousin, second cousin. Elena's family, 2 generations back, before the family split. My father found out when he married my mother. He used it, built the alliance on it, then burned the alliance when it stopped serving him and blamed your family for the fire. I paused. The war between the Sforza and Valtieri lines didn't start with a betrayal. It started with my father deciding that being adjacent to power wasn't the same as having it. Cassian hadn't moved. He was watching me with an expression I was learning to read. Not the controlled blankness he showed the world, but the other thing, the thing underneath, where the actual Cassian Valtieri processed information. Elena knew, I said. Or suspected. Your father's people told her. A warning, they thought. She was going to tell you the week she died. Now something moved in his face. A seismic thing, brief and deep. How do you know that? Because my father told me. Not as a confession, as a lesson. He told me the night he gave me this assignment. I looked at him steadily. He was teaching me what happens when sentiment makes people slow. He used your wife as the example. The silence that followed was not like other silences in that room. It was loaded, not with anger, with something more complex. Grief and rage wound so tightly around each other, they had become a third thing entirely. He killed her to prevent her from telling me, Cassian said. Flat, certain. He'd been working his way to this conclusion for 3 years. I had just given him the last piece. Yes. And then he sent her bloodline's granddaughter into my house. He doesn't know, I said. He doesn't know about my mother's family. He knows her maiden name, but not the lineage. He never bothered to trace it fully. He thought he was being symmetrical, sending me. He thought it was elegant. Cassian stood. He walked to the window. I watched his back, the particular stillness of a man who is very carefully not doing several things at once, and waited. You could have led with this, he said. Weeks ago. This information would have bought you significant leverage. I know. Why didn't you? I thought about the answer for a moment. Then I gave him the honest one. Because I didn't want it to be leverage, I said. I didn't want to purchase anything from you. I stopped, started again. I wanted you to know who I am, all of it, not because it's useful, just because it's true. He turned from the window. He looked at me across the room, and I felt the full weight of his attention. Not the calculating weight of it, but the other kind, the rare kind that was simply him seeing me, and something in me steadied. Not relaxed, steadied, the way a compass settles on its direction. Your brother, he said. Marco. He's Emilio's enforcer now. Yes. And you care for him. It wasn't a question. He had been watching me for weeks. He was the only person in that house who was kind to me, I said quietly. He didn't ask to be born into it any more than I did. Cassian nodded once, processing,
Filing. "When this ends," he said, "and it's ending soon, your brother has a choice, the same one you had." He didn't say, "And you made the right one." He didn't need to. He had said it with his eyes 3 nights ago in a narrow kitchen with his hand 3 inches from mine. I left his office and stood in the hallway for a moment with my back against the wall and my eyes closed. I was in love with Cassian Valtieri. I was in love with him the way foxes love dens, completely, practically, without recourse. And somewhere in the distance, the serpent was moving, and the endgame was coming, and I had chosen a side that my blood had never authorized. I chose it anyway. Engagement question. Sarah just handed Cassian the full truth. No leverage, no deal, just honesty. Has a man ever done something so completely that you felt the floor tilt? Because I think that's what just happened here. Tell me in the comments. The first sign was a car that parked on the east side of the building for 47 minutes and then left. I noticed it from the nursery window. Told Cassian that afternoon. He told Tommaso. The car was registered to a shell company with 3 layers of cover and a 4th layer that led, if you peeled it correctly, to a logistics firm that had done business with the Sforza network 18 months ago. "He's triangulating," Cassian said. "He knows I've gone quiet," I said. "My report stopped 4 weeks ago. He's been patient. He thought it was a long game. Now he's deciding whether I'm compromised or dead. If he decides dead, he stops watching. If he decides compromised, he moves." Cassian looked at me. "Send a report." I went very still. "What do you want me to say? That you're close, that the children have a routine, that you need 2 more weeks." His voice was even. "Make him wait." This was the thing about Cassian that was hardest to look directly at. His absolute lack of sentiment in the execution of a plan, which existed in the same person as the man who laughed almost not quite in a narrow kitchen at midnight, and the man who knew which drawer Bianca kept her drawings in, and sometimes took one out when he thought no one was watching. He didn't compartmentalize. He simply held all of it at once, the cold and the warm, the strategist and the father. I sent the report. My father responded within an hour, pleased, patient. We had, by my calculation, 10 days before he lost patience. The second sign came 6 days later. Luca didn't come down for breakfast. This was unusual enough that I was up the stairs before the thought fully formed. His room was empty. Bianca's room? Empty. My heart relocated to my throat. Tommaso was already in the hallway. He'd been alerted by something in the security feed, and we moved through the penthouse in a silence that was very efficient and completely terrifying. We found them in Cassian's office. Both children were sitting on the floor behind his desk, solemn and wide-eyed. Luca had his arm around Bianca. On the desk was a photograph, taken through a long lens from the street. Me, with Bianca in the park 3 days ago. Stamped across it in red ink were 4 words in Italian. Resa dei conti viene. Reckoning is coming. Cassian was standing over the desk with his phone to his ear and his back to the door, and his voice was absolutely level in a way that meant the opposite of calm. Tommaso saw the photograph and made a sound in the back of his throat that was almost below hearing range. I crossed to the children. Luca looked up at me with his father's eyes. "Is it about you?" he asked. "It is about a man who thinks he has power over me," I said. "He's wrong." Luca considered this. Bianca pressed herself against my side. I held her and looked over her head at the photograph and felt something cold and clear settle in me like water finding its level. Cassian finished his call. He turned. He looked at his children with that devastatingly private expression, and then at me. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Change of plan." He moved the children to the interior rooms. He called in every man he had, and then he took me into the weapons room, a place I had located on day 3 but not entered, out of a caution that seemed now like a different lifetime's instinct. And he handed me a Glock and a knife with a weight that was familiar in a way I did not hide. 3 Sforza safe houses in the city, he said. Tommaso has 2. I'm giving you the 3rd. You're trusting me with targets? I'm trusting you with my children's safety, he said. The targets are incidental. The distinction was not small. We stood in the weapons room with the city humming outside and the knife cold in my hand, and the air between us carrying the particular weight of people who have moved past the theoretical into the actual. If something happens to me, I started. Nothing will happen to you, he said. Cassian, nothing, he said again, and the word came out with an edge I had never heard from him before. Not authority, but something raw, something personal. Will happen to you. I looked at him. He looked back. The moment lasted long enough to be something. Then Tommaso's voice came through on comms, and it was time. The serpent didn't wait for our 10 days. He moved on day 8. My father's plan, and I had to give him operational credit even as I was dismantling it, was clean and simultaneous. Draw Cassian out with a threat at the docks, strip the penthouse of most of its security in the response, and send a 4-man team for the children in the window. What he hadn't accounted for was that Cassian had known for 4 days that the dock call was coming, had arranged a ghost response team to handle it, and had tripled the actual penthouse security while appearing to have it. He had also not accounted for me. I was in the children's interior room when the first man breached the stairwell. I had Luca and Bianca behind the wardrobe in the reading nook, a space Bianca had shown me weeks ago, her secret kingdom, a small hollow in the wall that a child fit into perfectly and that an adult in tactical gear would never look into first. Don't come out, I told them. Not for anything except my voice or your father's. Not Tommaso, not anyone else. Only us. Luca looked at me with those old eyes. Are you going to fight them? Yes. Good, he said. Then he pulled Bianca in and the small door closed. What followed was not graceful. It was not cinematic. Violence, actual violence, is ugly and immediate and costs something no one prepays in full. I handled 2 men in the hallway, took a hit to the ribs that would bruise spectacularly, I noted distantly, and kept moving. The building's comms were up. Tommaso's voice in my earpiece was a running report of positions. Cassian's voice cut through at one point, very close. East Hall. Handled, I said. A pause. Ribs? Aesthetic issue, not structural. Another pause, shorter. Something in the frequency that was almost a laugh. The 4th man was the one I hadn't expected. Not Sforza street muscle. Older, methodical. He had come through the service entrance and was moving directly for the reading nook with the specific purposefulness of a man who had been given a blueprint. Someone had given him a blueprint. The blueprint included the reading nook. I got there 10 seconds ahead of him. 10 seconds is an eternity when you know what you're doing. When it was over and I was standing over him with my lungs working harder than I wanted them to, I heard the small door of the reading nook open and felt a small, warm weight press against my back. Bianca had her face buried between my shoulder blades, both arms wrapped around me from behind. She didn't say anything. She just held on. I covered her hands with mine. Luca stepped out and assessed the scene with his father's eyes and said, with an 8-year-old's devastating practicality, "You're bleeding." "Aesthetically," I said. He looked at me for a moment. Then he crossed the room and took my other hand. We were like that, all 3 of us, Bianca behind me and Luca beside me, when Cassian appeared in the doorway. He took in the scene in the way that he took in everything, completely, in sequence, landing last on me. The expression on his face was the one I had seen once before, in the unguarded second when you looked at Bianca laughing, the one that lasted under a second and was devastatingly real. This time it lasted longer. He crossed the room. His children moved to him, and he put his arms around both of them, Bianca against his chest, Luca under his other arm, and over their heads his eyes found mine and stayed. I looked back. There was nothing either of us needed to say. Everything had already been said in the ways that count, in kitchens at midnight, in weapons rooms, in the truth delivered without leverage, in the choice made over and over in small ways before the large one arrived. We looked at each other across the small distance with his children between us, and the storms settling outside and the wreckage of my father's plan around us, and I felt myself arrive somewhere. Not dramatically, just finally. Finally. My father came for us 3 days later. He came in person, which surprised everyone. Emilio Sforza was not, as a rule, a man who attended the conclusions of his own plans. He preferred the distance of strategy. But something had shifted, perhaps the failure, perhaps something else, and he arrived at an address he thought was a Voltieri secondary location with 12 men and his son. Marco was with him. I had asked Cassian once what he planned to do about Marco. He'd said, "Give him a choice." I'd said, "He might not take it." He'd said, "That's what makes it a choice." The address my father arrived at was not, in fact, a Voltieri secondary location. It was the location Cassian had been building toward for months before I arrived, a controlled space, secured, with every exit accounted for. My father walked into it with 12 men and found Cassian, Tommaso, and an arrangement of Voltieri soldiers that made it very clear that the 12 men's primary strategic opportunity was to stand still. I was there. My father saw me across the room. I want to describe the expression on his face. I want to find something complex in it, paternal grief, some flicker of the man who had occasionally, when strategy required it, been kind to me. I looked for it. I was honest with myself about what I found. What I found was calculation. Rapid, practiced recalculation. He had lost his inside asset. He was running probabilities. His eyes moved from me to Cassian to Tommaso and back, and he was already working. Marco was not calculating. Marco was looking at me with an expression that was rawer and truer. Recognition. He knew what I'd done. He knew what it had cost. And in his eyes, I could see the same question I had been living inside for weeks. What do you do when the family you were born into is the thing you have to choose against? Cassian stepped forward. "Emilio," he said. My father's chin lifted. Even here, even surrounded, the performance of authority. "You've made a significant miscalculation," Cassian said. "Not tactically. You're a capable tactician. You miscalculated what your daughter was." "My daughter," my father said, with a precision of contempt, "is a traitor." I let that sit in the air between us. Let it be what it was. "Your daughter," I said, "is the reason your 12 men are still breathing, because she asked him to give them the option to walk out." I paused. "That offer expires shortly." My father looked at me for a long moment. Something moved through his face. Not regret. He didn't do regret. But something adjacent to the recognition that a tool he had spent 26 years sharpening had decided to be something else entirely, and that he had, in some foundational way, built this outcome himself. He looked at Cassian. "You'll never be safe. This isn't over." "It is for you," Cassian said. It was. My father's 12 men made the correct choice. So did my father, in the end. Not from wisdom, but from the arithmetic of the room. He was moved to a location where the Sforza network would spend years trying to untangle the power vacuum left by his removal from operational control. The empire he had built from treachery and shadow began its quiet collapse without him at the center. Marco stood very still throughout. After it was over, I walked to him. We stood face to face in the middle of the room, and I felt the full weight of what we were to each other. Siblings who had survived the same house and been shaped by it differently, and loved each other imperfectly and honestly across the damage. "You have a choice," I said. Cassian's words, now mine. He looked at me for a long time. Then he looked at Cassian. "Is the offer real?" Marco said. "It's real," Cassian said. Marco was quiet. Then, slowly, he nodded. He made his choice. It took time, months and several conversations I won't detail here, but he made it. He walked out of the Sforza world the way you walk out of anything that has been your entire architecture, carefully, leaving most of it behind, carrying only what was worth carrying. The rest came in the way that real things come. Not in a single dramatic declaration, but in accumulation. In days. In Cassian appearing in the nursery doorway one evening and watching me read to Bianca, and then sitting down on the floor next to Luca, who was doing homework, and staying for 2 hours not because anything required him to be there, but because he wanted to be there. In the particular domesticity of that, the man who had never had space for softness, making space. In the night he found me on the terrace at midnight, looking at the city, and stood beside me without touching me for a long time, and then said, very quietly, "I used to come out here after Elena died, to feel the size of things, so the grief didn't feel so large by comparison." "Does it still work?" I asked. "Less," he said. "Now I come out here for different reasons." He turned to look at me. The city behind him, the wind doing something to his hair that he was not self-conscious about, his expression containing everything he had been managing and not saying for months. "Serafina." "I know," I said. He looked at me. "I haven't said it." "I know what it sounds like when you haven't said it," I told him. "I've been listening for weeks." Something in him changed, loosened, like a fist that finally opens. He reached for me in the dark, and this time there was no counter between us, no 3-inch gap, no architecture of restraint, just his hand finding mine, and the city below, and the specific feeling of arriving at something you didn't know you'd been traveling toward until you were already there. "I was sent to destroy your legacy," I said. My voice was steady. "I know. I would have burned everything before I let them touch those children. Before I let them touch you." He turned my hand over in his, deliberate, looking at it. "You became mine," he said. Quiet, factual, final. "Yes," I said. "Not defeat. Arrival." We stood on the terrace for a long time. Eventually, he put his arm around me and I leaned into the warmth of him, and we looked out at the city that had built him and tested me and held all of this. And it was quiet in the way that things are quiet when everything necessary has finally been said. He stopped haunting the dark. I stopped running from my den. And in the penthouse behind us, 2 small people slept peacefully under the watch of 37 cameras and a father who had learned, again, that the things that survive the fire are the only things worth building around. That's what the Mafia boss saw on his cameras that night. Not a weapon, not an enemy. A woman choosing. And everything, every war, every sacrifice, every blood-soaked year of building something from ashes had been quietly, impossibly worth it. Final question. I was sent to destroy your legacy, but you became mine. Which moment in this entire story broke you first? The kitchen? The cameras? Or this? I need to know. Leave it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for the next story, because it's going to be even darker. My darlings, if you made it to the end of this story, still breathing, maybe a little undone, then you already know what this channel is. It's the place we come to feel things that are too dark and too beautiful for ordinary Tuesday afternoons. It's the place where dangerous men fall in ways they didn't plan, and where women who were built into weapons decide, at the most important moment, to be something else entirely. Sarah and Cassian will stay with me. I hope they stay with you too. If this story reached you somewhere real, if you found yourself holding your breath in a narrow kitchen, or on a terrace at midnight, or in a nursery where two small people were sleeping, please subscribe. It costs nothing, and it means everything, because it lets me keep making these. Drop a comment. Tell me your moment, the one that broke you open. I read every single one. Until next time, my beautiful sinners, stay in the dark with me.